Chapter 4. He Makes a Discovery. The next morning, as soon as Brooks and Sally had gone to meet the school bus, Thomas Bean said, "Let's all get down to some facts and see what we can figure out." A study of the papers had yielded not the slightest clue, and it had been decided to save all further questions until this time, when they would have the morning to themselves. Little John had looked forward, hopefully, to this moment, yet he approached it with misgivings. His memory still told him nothing, and the Beans, much as he was beginning to love them, were still as strange to him as he was to them. "Let's start with your clothes," said Thomas, limping over to the table on which Mary had placed them. "They should tell us a lot. Is everything here?" "All but my boots and my knife and belt," he said. "I'm still wearing them." Mary Bean said, "His boots are woven of the same material as the rest of his clothes, only thicker. Even the soles." "No leather?" said Thomas. "Thomas," she said, "there isn't a scrap of leather in anything he owns." Leather was a new word. Little John asked about it and was shocked when he learned. "But how can you kill another creature for its skin?" he exclaimed. "That's the way people live, young fellow," Thomas said, frowning as he wrote something on a piece of paper. "Well, that's another odd fact about you. I'm going to stop being surprised and just jot down the facts. I learned in the Marines that if you get enough facts together, no matter how queer they may look alone, they'll always add up to something." The pencil in Thomas Bean's hand moved swiftly as he intoned, "No leather. Doesn't believe in killing things. Will not eat meat. Seems to know how to communicate with animals. Clothes, all hand-woven. Material like linen." "It's 100 times stronger than linen," Mary hastened to say. "The soles of his boots hardly show a sign of wear." "Vegetable fiber," Thomas mumbled, writing. "Tougher than rammy. Dove gray, designs on hem of jacket in tan and blue. Could be Indian or Siberian." "But they're not," said Mary Bean, "and I don't see any sense in writing all that down when I know the answer." "And what is the answer, Madam Bean?" I'm not ready to tell you," she said. "You should be seeing it for yourself. I think John sees it. Do you, John?" He was startled by her thought. "You could be right," he told her slowly. "I almost believe you are, but I am not sure yet. You're better able to judge. You have your memory." "Hey, what's all this?" Thomas asked curiously. "Skip it," Mary told him. "You're the fact finder. Have you listed his English as one of the facts?" "I'm listing it as a language that he knows." "That's not what I mean, Thomas." "Oh, come on. It takes years to learn English the way he speaks it. John's picked it up somewhere. He'd forgotten it temporarily. That crack on the head—" "No," said Little John. "Your language is new to me. I'm sure I never heard it until you spoke it. But I find it easy." "Oh, I don't doubt your word," said Thomas Bean, "but English just seems strange to you. There isn't a living soul who can pick it up in a day or two." "That's absolutely impossible. The thing is, you're able to sort of know our thoughts before we speak them. That's an unusual ability, though I've heard of people who can do it. Anyway, it's an ability that's helping you to relearn English as fast as you hear it. Doesn't that sound right to you?" Little John shook his head. "No, sir. I don't think in English. There's another language We'll come to that in a minute. It's all adding up." "What about cars and money?" Mary Bean asked quickly. "Can you add those up with the rest of it?" "Certainly," said Thomas. He was pacing back and forth with his awkward step, one hand rubbing his deeply lined face while he frowned at his notes. "It's beginning to make sense. Even the fact that he knows about radios and nothing about some other things. How's this? John was raised in a foreign country, in a very remote district. He learned to speak the language of that district probably before he learned English. Because it was a primitive sort of place, there was no money, and all trade was by barter. Naturally, there'd be no cars there, but his folks had a radio so they could keep in touch with the outside world. Wouldn't be surprised if his folks were missionaries. Sound right to you? Mary said, "Why must you be so reasonable, Thomas? But go ahead, name some places like that." "Oh, that's easy. I've been in a number of them. Parts of India, the Middle East, North Africa, and even South America. Those clothes could have been woven by Indians in the Andes." "Nonsense," Mary said. "Those people weave only with animal fibers and cotton. The material in John's clothes didn't come from any of the places you mentioned." "Well, where did it come from?" "Not from any place you know about. And while you're thinking of places, you might consider how he got here. That really stumps me." "He must have flown, Mary." "In what kind of plane, Thomas?" "Oh, a small private one, I'd say. One that hasn't been missed yet. It has to be that. There's no other solution. You see, when we found him, he was still wearing the clothes he must have put on when he left home. He'd hardly been wearing such odd-looking things if he had been in this country long enough to change them. I wish I'd thought of this earlier. He must have come in a plane, and it must have crashed somewhere here in the mountains. We'd better organize a search." Mary was shaking her head. "No, Thomas. John has never seen a plane in his life. He saw pictures of some in one of our magazines yesterday and asked me what they were." Thomas stared at her, then turned. "Is that true, John?" "Yes, sir. I'm certain I've never been in a plane, Mr. Bean." "But your memory, John—" "My memory doesn't keep me from knowing familiar things," he said earnestly. Well, what is familiar to you?" "Radios are familiar, sir. Books are very familiar. Deer and singing birds and birds like chickens are all familiar. And dogs." "Cows and horses?" "Horses, yes, but I'm sure I never saw a creature quite like a cow before, or machines like planes and automobiles. Of course, the idea of all those machines is familiar, and some of them seem familiar, like spaceships and—" "Spaceships?" Mary Bean said. "He saw some drawings of spaceships in one of the magazines." "But I've never been in one," Little John hastened to say. "It's just that I feel I've seen them. They are not strange like snakes and cows and the language you speak." Thomas Bean sat down. He began snapping his fingers, his face blank. Speech seemed to have deserted him. Mary laughed. "You wanted facts, Mr. Sherlock Holmes Bean. We'll toss a couple more at you. John, show him your knife. I'll get the clip." The clip was gold filigree, set with a blue stone. The knife, which had been entirely hidden by its woven sheath, was small, with a short, thin blade that looked like gold. Its handle was of finely carved wood, with a blue stone set in the golden hilt. "Well," said Mary, after Thomas had been examining the articles silently for several minutes, "you've been around, Mr. Bean. You're supposed to know something of gems and jewelry. Where were those things made?" Thomas shook his head. "I've never seen such work. If these stones are real, but of course they can't be. Star sapphires like these. He picked up a sliver of wood from the fireplace and sliced it with the knife. Sharp as a razor. Must be a special gold alloy." Suddenly he stood up. "Let's go down to the shop. I'd like to test these stones." As they went down the lane, Little John heard Rascal bark and was aware of the eager question in it. "Soon," he called to Rascal. "I have not forgotten." He watched Thomas unlock the shop door and followed him inside. "Why do you keep the door locked?" he asked, peering curiously and with quick interest at the rocks cramming the shelves and heaped in the corners, and at the glass case full of gems. Mary said, "Locks are to keep out thieves." "Thieves? Thieves?" It was another new word with a confusing thought behind it. "A thief is a person who steals," she explained. "We have a lot of valuable things here in the shop. If the windows weren't barred and the door didn't have a good lock on it, somebody would break in and take everything we own. Even the safe, probably." But why?" Thomas asked, "Don't people steal where you're from?" "Of course not. Why would they? It seems so stupid. They—" "Go on," Mary urged. "You're remembering." He shook his head. "I almost thought of something, but it's gone. I only know that stealing is stupid and foolish. I'm sure I've never heard of a person doing it. Why would he?" "It's one way to make a profit," Thomas began dryly. "If you don't mind risking jail, there are people who'll do anything for money. They'll even start a war." "Profit? Jail? Money? War?" "Here we go again," said Mary. "You see, Thomas, English is strange to him because it contains ideas that are strange." Little John listened carefully, holding back his astonishment as she proceeded to explain. One subject led to another. She had finished about war and was touching upon government and rulers in power when they were interrupted. A man on horseback was approaching. It was the same rider who had gone by on the road Saturday evening before the Beans appeared in their truck. "That's Angus Macklin," said Mary. "He lives up the road behind the Johnsons. I hope he goes on." But Angus Macklin, seeing the door open, stopped, dismounted, and came in. He was a short, thick man with round, blinking eyes and an easy smile. Little John was not deceived by the smile, though he was fascinated by the repulsive wad of tobacco Angus was chewing. "Howdy, folks, howdy," Angus said heartily. "See you're open for business. Ought to be getting some customers if the weather holds." "A little early for tourists," Thomas told him. "How are things, Angus?" "So. Ain't seen Tip and Lenny around, have you?" "Not this morning. Why aren't they in school?" You know kids," said Angus Macklin. "School's out tomorrow, and it's kind of hard to make 'em go. When they heard about that wild boy, they just took off. Gilby told me about it yesterday after church. Soon's we got home, my kids lit out to hunt 'em. They lit out again this morning, pretending they was going fishing, but I know better." "Mighty queer about that crazy wild boy. Gilby tell you how far he jumped? Nearly 40 feet. "Nonsense," Thomas said shortly. "Gilby was probably drinking. I'm sure he saw a stray Indian kid." "Oh, I don't know," said Angus, scratching under his cap and blinking owlishly at Little John. "That thing he saw was plumb wild and unnatural. I've seen some queer things myself in these mountains. Lights where there shouldn't be no lights. Heard music where there shouldn't be no music. My kids can take care of themselves, but all the same, that wild thing could be dangerous." He paused. "Nice-looking boy you got here. Ain't noticed him around. He visiting you folks?" Thomas nodded. "John O'Connor, son of an old friend of mine in the Marines." Angus smiled meaninglessly and grunted. "Well, I'll go along. You see them fool kids of mine, tell 'em I want 'em home." They watched him right away. Thomas said a little angrily, "So the news is out. I should have known Gilby would tell somebody like Angus. It's going to spread all over the mountains and get wilder." He drew forth a knife and clip he had hidden under the workbench. As he studied them again, he began to whistle softly through his teeth. "Out with it," said Mary. "Are the gems real?" "They're real. I can't believe it. John, have you any idea what these things are worth?" Little John looked at him intently. "They are not worth what you think they are, Mr. Bean. You're thinking they're worth more than your house and everything in the shop. But that's all wrong. Anyway, a thing shouldn't have two values." "Two values?" said Thomas, raising his eyebrows. "Yes, sir," he said seriously. "You're judging the value of my knife by the amount of money you could sell it for, but that has nothing to do with its real value." Thomas whistled softly. "I can't figure you out, John. It's a good thing we're not in business together, or we'd never make a profit." "But doesn't the idea of a profit seem wrong?" "I'll try to explain, John," Thomas said very patiently. "If Mary and I couldn't make a little profit on the things we sell, we'd soon go broke and wouldn't have enough to eat." Little John looked at him helplessly. Again, the dreadful feeling of lostness poured over him. He was sure of the answer now. Mary Bean had guessed it. Suddenly he turned, peering out of the back window as he heard Rascal barking. Rascal was lost too, chained in a world where everything seemed wrong. "Please," he begged, "may I take Rascal out of his pen? I promise he'll be good." Thomas frowned, but Mary said, "Let him try it, Thomas. I'm sure he can manage Rascal." Okay. We'll chance it this once. And here's your knife unless you want me to keep it in the safe. You don't want to lose anything like this." "Oh, I won't lose it, sir. I need it to... Go on," Mary said quietly. "You need it to do what with it?" "I don't know. Maybe it will come back if I run with Rascal. I think running will help." As he darted out the door, Mary said, "He's upset, Thomas. I think he sees the truth. Can't you see it too? You've got facts enough. Or is it that you just don't want to face the facts?" "But Mary, they don't make sense. I can't." "Look at him," she gasped, staring through the rear window. "Thomas, look!" In his eagerness to release Rascal, Little John was racing up the steep lane. Unconsciously, he had made his feet light so that his boots hardly touched the ground. Only a deer could have equaled his upward bounds. "You win," Thomas said finally, expelling a long breath. "I don't know how he got here, and I can't understand why some things are so familiar to him, but he doesn't come from this world." "Of course not. What are we going to do?" Seems like the important thing is to find out how he got here if we can. I'm afraid I see trouble ahead."